I'm Reverend Kimberli Meadows, a member of the pastoral staff of the First Baptist Church of North Brentwood in Maryland, where our senior pastor is Reverend Dr. Dwayne T.K. I am one of the facilitators of our Wednesday night Life Application Bible Study. In May, we began a new series titled Dealing with Temptation. In the first session, we focused on the source of temptation. The main point was we have no one to blame but ourselves when we fall into sin. We learned that temptation is the enticement to do evil. One of the scriptural references was James 1:13, which reads, "No one, when tempted, should say, 'I am being tempted by God,' for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself tempts no one." During part 2, we discussed the topic, the temptation to rely on myself instead of God. The main point was that God's provision is always better than what we try to get for ourselves. In our materialistic, fast-paced, self-indulgent culture, where we can have what we want when we want it, that can be hard for some to believe. We are bombarded with images, opportunities, and advertisements that appeal to our desire for more of everything, from love and security to independence and health. The temptations distract us from the present and keep us longing for more. The more distracted we are, the more we forget about God and become reckless. This is the same strategy that Satan tried on Jesus in Matthew 4:1-4. Matthew records that after Jesus' baptism, the Spirit of God led him into the wilderness. There, the tempter, or Satan, tempts Jesus after he was weak from fasting 40 days and nights. Fasting is the practice of not eating in order to spend more time in prayer and to develop a greater sensitivity to the Lord. The tempter tried to get him to use his power as the Son of God to turn stones into bread to distract him and cause him to be disobedient to fulfilling his purpose of being the perfect sacrifice that makes humanity right with God. Jesus responds in Matthew 4:4. He answered, "It is written, 'Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God.'" Matthew writes to prove that Jesus is the Messiah, the Anointed One, the Son of God. The quote from Deuteronomy chapter 8 connects Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness and being tempted to the Old Testament account of God's purpose, power, and provision in the 40 years of the Israelites wandering in the wilderness because of their disobedience. The word reads, "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord." In these verses, Moses explains that God's discipline was to humble them and test if their hearts were committed to total dependence on him, even for the bread he provided, which was manna, the bread from heaven. Moses was encouraging the Israelites to be obedient and stay in relationship with God, but they couldn't do it. They would sin, which is doing anything that separates us from God. Then they'd cry out to God and change their ways, and he would forgive them. Then they'd repeat the cycle. That is the sin nature of humanity. But thanks be to God for Jesus. Because of his obedience, even to death on the cross, we are made right with God. When we come to him by faith in Christ, we are treated as sons and daughters, heirs of all God's wealth. We can trust that there is nothing he will hold back from us. Our hearts can be committed to total dependence on him. The heart is the central place that contains conscious will and desire, and it represents what is central to who we are. We can live out this lesson and resist the temptation to rely on ourselves with a grateful heart. And we can do this by taking a moment to count our blessings and give thanks to God for his provision. With a trusting heart, we can believe that God will strengthen our faith as we wait for him to provide what we need in his perfect timing. And a generous heart. As we trust God to provide what we need, we must be willing to give and be a blessing because he blesses us. I hope you can join our next class. We will continue our study of dealing with temptation, and our topic will be the temptation to test God. God bless you.